Hello, and welcome to One Question Interview. Today we have Nico Santos, beat maker, production, stuff like that, electronic beats. Yeah.
It's true.
You produce for rappers and stuff like that.
A couple of
You have
rappers.
your own beats.
Yeah.
So Nico, you use a lot of gear in your music. I need the timeline of what has worked in the past, what hasn't worked, what are you using now? How do you use all this gear to your advantage?
Shit, you want a timeline? I can give you a timeline. Yeah. Well, I kind of started out on piano when I was super young. I think I had at least 14 years under my belt when it came to piano, if I'm being realistic, because I quit halfway through COVID. That shit was fucking awful. But besides that, if I recall correctly, I used a lot of different instruments in my household. I got my hands on like a really shitty practice marimba during elementary school. They would like mandate this shit in high school bands all the time. So I'd have to be practicing that. I was really just surrounded with like, I'm very grateful to have grown up in a household where there's a bunch of instruments around me and I'm like able to express myself in different ways. But if we're talking production wise, I'd say it's like before the year of COVID, I was really getting into somewhat of the hip-hop scene, I guess. Not necessarily a specific location, like East Coast or West Coast, but just hip-hop in general. I started off very mainstream, admittedly. I started with Childish Gambino. But I remember just wanting to recreate a lot of the sounds that happened, and it just led me to this crazy rabbit hole that I never expected to go down. Thank you, the internet. It's crazy. Never want to go in there as much as I used to back then, but for sure, one thing led me to another. I learned about Audacity, so I tried making interesting podcast things when I was younger with Audacity. That was like probably my first digital audio workstation, if I had to describe it. When I was younger in middle school, I'd say, like end of middle school going into high school, I had these big aspirations for this podcast, and I'd tell my friends, like, get Audacity, we'll record our really bad gamer mics into this, and I'll edit it together, it's gonna be all good. And it was good. I think I had like 4 episodes at the time, but I just really wasn't passionate with it. But Audacity, funny enough, would make a comeback for me maybe 2 years into the future. Sophomore year in high school, when COVID hit for me at least, I remember coming back to Audacity and just messing around with different one-shots and stuff that I found online. And later on, going through the internet and just learning more about hip-hop around that time, I finally got into the weirder stuff. It was Knowledge's Hood Dreams album that really resonated with me. So I sought out more of that sound, which led me to this video of Bad Snacks with an SP404 and showing how the effects work, and my mind was absolutely blown. I remember that was a complete game changer for me because that led me to this other YouTube channel called the Mellotron. Cool French radio station, but earlier on around quarantine, or maybe like a couple years before that, they had this takeover of this certain collective of like 3 artists from around the world. I think it was called Menace. They had these awesome SP404 sets on the boat. So, I was talking to my parents about it. I was like super interested. It was quarantine, I really had nothing else to do with my time. So my parents actually ended up gifting me my first sampler, the SP404A, not the SX, it was the A. It's kind of crazy how expensive it was. I'm super grateful that they got that for me though, because that was probably like my first time with any sort of hardware in general. And I remember for the next year or so, like I was just working on that specifically, learning how the sampler worked, its ins and outs, besides using like a lot of the default stock settings, actually recording stuff into it, learning how to truncate samples, how to load one-shots in, how to actually program through resampling or a bunch of other programmable options on the older version. They're not as good as the newer one that I have. We'll get to that later probably. But I remember just trying to find different ways to work around the limitations. And I actually ended up releasing my first album. I think it was called J tapes or something dumb like that. I was super ambitious with it though. And I remember just using the SP404, a really shitty gamer microphone cable, and then plugging an RCA out with the aux cable into the shitty microphone cable, and then just doing everything through there. And I used Audacity as a DAW to like track stuff that was being sent into the SP into the Audacity, and then lining everything. It was such a goofy process, but it really like, to get the bare bones experience was probably the best thing, because then everything afterwards that followed it was probably the best thing that happened to me. Later on, I was starting to mess with more sequencers. I think it was a Korg Volca sample. I think my friend Patrick has a couple of old videos of me like just trying to figure it out. It was really funny. I look back at those days with horror sometimes, because I opened some of those up recently and they were straight garbage. But I remember in order to update my game in the podcast days, I actually ended up using a cracked version of FL11 for like maybe 2 months, and like I had no idea how to use it. I was just like tracking stuff in. It was awesome, and then I just left it alone. My return to a DAW, besides the Audacity and SP404 stuff, I remember I actually saved up enough money. I was like, Mom, I'd actually like to buy Ableton and see what goes with it, because I see all my favorite artists using it. I was like, sure, I'll hop on the wave. And I remember getting it and sitting down, and like for the next like 3 months of my life, it was just like wake up, go to virtual school, talk to some girl or something, and then go straight onto Ableton for like 6 to 8 hours a day. Like I had like, I think it's like completely important to realize that like beforehand I barely had any like DAW experience. The closest thing I had to that was Audacity and maybe like recording audio tracks into FL. I didn't even know how the fucking drum sequencer worked. That was like foreign to me. So being able to work with Ableton was so cool, because it was such a blank slate, and like I had some tutorials, but I didn't really read the manuals or do anything like that. I just tried to figure stuff out on my own. And I just kept working with that in tandem with the SP. I would make beats intended for the SP. And I just remember having this like really weird philosophy, like, you know, I'm going to do a live stream set. It's going to be cool. I'm going to be able to record it into Ableton and then send it out to the internet for anyone else who wants to see it. Just like a normal DJ or something. It was until maybe a couple months into quarantine, maybe a year after, when summer hit. So not the first summer of COVID, but like the second summer of COVID. I performed this live stream set, and I had something new with me. It was interesting. The way I routed the audio was using the old SP404A, going into Ableton, and then having this really, like, I bought this really shitty Akai MPK-25 controller for like $10 off of a garage sale. And I'd use the pads to like trigger one-shots or like extra effects on top of it, even though it really wasn't needed because I already had everything I needed in the SP. But I didn't know any better. It was tight. Afterwards, I just remember not using the SP for a good while, and I was really just like using Ableton, my mouse and keyboard, and everything else that came with it. And I really just grinded that entire thing out. I didn't really have any desires for any sort of other gear. I had some like other synthesizers, like the pocket piano from Critter and Guitari.
Oh, yeah.
I gave that to my friend. I didn't really have a use for it anymore because, you know, I have everything I need in Ableton. It's not like I need to, you know, I have no use for it. I try to give away as much gear as possible to like people who would use it more than I would, because like I'd rather it be used by someone who's like willing to sit down and look at the machine as I did with the SP and like figure it out for themselves, because I had no tutorials. I barely read any fucking manuals unless it's like the mono. I'll get to that later. Later on, I just kind of kept running with it until the SP404 Mark II came out. I was practically begging my parents to like split the check with me and just like pay half and half and then get it by Christmas. I got it in March, and that's when it happened. I just spent a straight 3 months on that thing, figuring out the workflow transferring from the old SP404 into the newer version, how it could be connected to the actual computer and used as a MIDI controller. That shit freaked me the fuck out. I was like, this is like the best thing I own. Like, I literally have no qualms to like how else I use this device. I had like a weird DJ phase in the middle. I used a Go DJ Plus They don't really make them anymore. I bought one off of eBay for like 150, and I gave it to one of my rapper friends. He's gonna use it more than I will, so it's, you know, I have no shame in just giving stuff away. It's like, you're gonna use it, I'll be okay.
Yeah, that's cool.
But it was really just the SP404 Mark II in Ableton for a while, up until my interview for Berkeley. That's when I really started shifting into using my old Ableton Push 1 and I think it was a M Audio Key Station 49. I just bought that keyboard because I had to use it for the EDI interview, and it's been one of my favorite pieces in my room since. Like, there's a bunch of stickers on it now. I use it sometimes, but you know, I'm still a very laptop oriented kind of producer. Could ask anyone. I'm usually making something while I'm sitting on the couch or doing something else. That's when I sold my old SP404A to one of my good friends. Shout out to Jay Herlock, crazy keyboardist back in NJ. Like, they're insane. They were looking for an SP. I was like, yeah, I'll sell you mine for like $350, and I ended up using that money to buy a Monome. And if you don't know what the Monome is, I got the Monome 64. It's this really awesome open source. It's not really a MIDI controller, but if you have Ableton and Max for Live and this whole bunch of conglomerate of other plugins and stuff, you can make it into a performance tool sequencer. Really, whatever you want. I'm a bit limited by the buttons, but I make it work. Because there's like so much more you could do with it. It's like literally like a 256 button version of it. Like, wow, that's insane to me. Let alone, like, I dream about getting the 128 version of it. It's been a fun controller because it's like not what I'm used to in terms of performance. It's like actual like time based. I'm a lot more interactive with it rather than just effects. I'm actually controlling the momentum of the song, especially with performances. I have something coming up May 2nd for that. I don't know when this is going to be released. Hi, Nico in the future. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Besides that, right now, I guess what I'm rocking right now, if I'm doing like normal Nico performances, it's the SP404 Mark II. But if it's like something odd or like I'm trying something new, my workflow has just evolved so much into just using the Monome 64, the Launchpad X64, and then Ableton. And like, it's very plug and play. I really like how plug and play my stuff is, because I'll always make a point where a lot of the gear that I buy, it either has to A, stand alone, or B, so ridiculously like simple yet like expansive upon it. Like, the Monome is perfect. It's just 64 buttons, but what can those 64 buttons do? What can they represent in terms of performance? That kind of versatility is so important to me because it allows me to push myself in places I really didn't expect to see myself going to. Yeah, but I think that covers it. I think I'm gonna venture into trackers more. I've been looking at this M8 tracker that I've had for like almost a year now, and I kind of been neglecting it. I've probably got to figure something out with that soon.
Yeah.
But I'm super excited. It's just interesting to see where my sound has gone, purely because of the gear that I have around me. The way I approach stuff now, besides just like making it for myself now, it's like, how can I perform this? How can I bring this to an audience of people that want to get it? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
All
right, you good?
I think I got it.
Once again, Nico.